July 9, 1983, and Eagle Lake in northern Minnesota was crowded with vacationers enjoying the summer weekend, with families camping along the shoreline and boats crisscrossing the water under clear blue skies. The Lawson family had rented a small cabin on the eastern shore for a week, a rustic two-bedroom structure with a dock extending into the lake, and a canoe tied alongside for exploring the calm waters. Tyler Lawson was 9 years old that Saturday morning. A boy with dark curly hair, brown eyes, an athletic build from playing youth soccer, and a cautious nature that made his parents trust him around water. He wore red swim trunks with white stripes, a gray t-shirt with Minnesota Vikings across the front, orange water shoes with Velcro straps, and a bright yellow life jacket his mother insisted he wear whenever near the lake. Tyler had come to Eagle Lake with his parents, Daniel and Christine Lawson, and his younger sister Megan, who was 6, and the family had been enjoying swimming and fishing since arriving on Thursday. At approximately 10 a.m. Saturday, Tyler asked if he could take the canoe out alone to paddle to a small island about 200 yards from their dock, a trip he'd made twice earlier in the week with his father. "You can go, but you have to wear your life jacket the entire time and come back in 30 minutes, Christine instructed, checking that Tyler's life jacket was properly fastened. Tyler promised he would follow the rules, and Daniel helped him untie the canoe and watched as Tyler paddled away from the dock, using smooth strokes they'd practiced together. The small island was visible from the cabin, a tree-covered outcropping about the size of a tennis court, and Tyler had told his parents he wanted to explore it and look for interesting rocks to bring back. Daniel and Christine sat on the dock watching Tyler paddle toward the island, and they could see the yellow life jacket clearly against the blue water as he made steady progress across the calm lake. At 10:08 a.m., Tyler reached the island and pulled the canoe onto the narrow rocky shore, and his parents saw him step out and begin walking around the perimeter examining the shoreline. "We're going inside to make sandwiches for lunch," Christine called across the water. "Stay on the island and we'll watch for you from the window. Be ready to come back in 20 minutes. Tyler waved to acknowledge he'd heard, and Daniel and Christine walked to the cabin approximately 30 yards from the dock, and Christine positioned herself at the kitchen window that provided a clear view of the island. At 10:12 a.m., Christine glanced at the island and saw Tyler's yellow life jacket moving among the trees, and she continued preparing sandwiches while keeping periodic watch through the window. At 10:18 a.m., Christine looked up expecting to see Tyler getting into the canoe to paddle back, but she couldn't see the yellow life jacket anywhere on the visible shoreline of the island. Christine called to Daniel, and both parents walked quickly to the dock scanning the island for Tyler, thinking he'd moved to the far side where trees obscured their view from the cabin. They called Tyler's name across the water, their voices carrying clearly in the quiet morning, but there was no response and no movement visible on the small island. By 10:22 a.m., Daniel had gotten into their motorboat and was speeding toward the island, and Christine stood on the dock calling Tyler's name while Megan cried beside her. Daniel reached the island at 10:24 a.m. and found the canoe pulled up on shore exactly where Tyler had left it, but there was no sign of his son anywhere on the small island. In approximately 10 to 15 minutes, while his parents made sandwiches in a cabin with a clear view of the island, 9-year-old Tyler Lawson vanished from a tiny outcropping in the middle of Eagle Lake. If you want to hear what really happened in this case that everyone initially thought was a tragic drowning, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's continue. Daniel searched the entire island, which took less than 5 minutes to walk around completely, calling Tyler's name and checking behind every tree and rock formation. The yellow life jacket Tyler had been wearing was found on the ground near the shore, unfastened and discarded as if Tyler had deliberately removed it, and this discovery filled Daniel with dread. Daniel immediately searched the water around the island, diving down and feeling along the rocky bottom for any sign of Tyler, but the water was only 6 to 8 feet deep and relatively clear with good visibility. Christine called 911 from the cabin at 10:28 a.m., reporting that her son had disappeared from an island in Eagle Lake and might have drowned, and emergency responders were immediately dispatched. By 11 a.m., the Minnesota State Patrol had arrived with dive teams, and rescue boats were searching the waters around the island while officers interviewed the Lawson family about what had happened. The working assumption was that Tyler had removed his life jacket and had somehow fallen into the water and drowned, despite the shallow depth and his swimming ability, and divers focused on recovering a body. Christine was hysterical, explaining that she'd been watching from the window and had seen Tyler's yellow life jacket just minutes before he disappeared, and she couldn't understand how he could have drowned so quickly. The lake around the island was searched systematically, with divers checking every foot of the bottom, looking for Tyler's body caught in rocks or submerged vegetation, but they found nothing. By afternoon, the search had expanded to cover the entire lake, with the theory being that currents might have carried Tyler's body away from the island, even though Eagle Lake was known for calm, still waters. Boats dragged the lake bottom with hooks and nets, and divers checked deeper areas farther from shore. But hours of intensive searching produced no body and no evidence that Tyler had drowned. Detective Robert Chen arrived at 2:00 p.m. and immediately questioned the drowning assumption because several facts didn't fit that scenario, despite everyone's initial conclusions. The discarded life jacket suggested Tyler had intentionally removed it, but a 9-year-old who'd been taught water safety wouldn't remove a life jacket and then go swimming alone in a lake. The island was tiny and had been thoroughly searched within minutes, and Tyler couldn't have fallen and hit his head without leaving blood or other evidence that officers had found none of. The water around the island was shallow and clear with excellent visibility, and if Tyler had drowned there, his body should have been easily visible to divers who'd searched multiple times. Chen interviewed other boaters and campers who'd been on Eagle Lake that morning, asking if anyone had seen boats near the island or noticed anything unusual around 10 a.m. One fisherman reported seeing a small motorboat near the island around 10:15 a.m., but he'd been far away and hadn't paid close attention, and he couldn't describe the boat or occupants with any detail. This information about a possible boat near the island shifted Chen's investigation away from accidental drowning toward the possibility that Tyler had been taken from the island by someone in a watercraft. The theory emerged that someone in a boat had approached the island, had convinced or forced Tyler to remove his life jacket and get into their boat, and had left before Daniel arrived just minutes later. But this theory raised questions about who would have been on Eagle Lake that morning with the intention of abducting a child, and how they could have acted so quickly in the brief window of opportunity. By evening, the case was being treated as a potential abduction rather than an accidental drowning, and the FBI was contacted to assist with an investigation that had taken a disturbing turn. Special Agent Catherine Wells arrived from Minneapolis by 7 p.m., and she immediately organized interviews with everyone who'd been on or near Eagle Lake on Saturday morning. The small motorboat that the fishermen had reported seeing became the primary lead, and investigators worked to identify every boat that had been on the lake and account for their movements during the critical time frame. But Eagle Lake was popular with dozens of boats on the water at any given time during summer weekends, and tracking down every watercraft and operator proved challenging without more specific descriptions. The media coverage shifted from reporting a tragic drowning to covering a missing child case, and Tyler's photo appeared on television across Minnesota, showing him smiling in his Vikings t-shirt. The yellow life jacket found discarded on the island was processed for fingerprints and any evidence beyond Tyler's, but forensic analysis revealed only his own prints and no indication anyone else had touched it. Christine struggled with guilt, believing that if she'd been watching more carefully from the window, she might have seen what happened to Tyler, though Chen assured her 10 minutes was not an unreasonable time to look away. Daniel blamed himself for allowing Tyler to go to the island alone, and he spent the evening in their motorboat circling the island repeatedly, unable to accept that his son had vanished in the time it took to make sandwiches. By Sunday, the search had expanded beyond the lake to surrounding forests and roads, with the theory being that whoever took Tyler had transported him away from Eagle Lake by boat and then by vehicle. By Monday, the case had become major news across Minnesota and neighboring states, with Tyler's disappearance featured prominently on television and in newspapers, and the yellow life jacket becoming a symbol of the mystery. Detective Chen focused investigation on people who owned or had access to small motorboats, and who'd been in the Eagle Lake area on Saturday morning, creating a list of potential suspects to interview. One name that emerged was Gerald Thompson, a 54-year-old man who lived in a cabin on the western shore of Eagle Lake year-round, and was known locally as a recluse who kept to himself. Thompson owned a small aluminum fishing boat with an outboard motor, and neighbors reported that he was often on the lake early mornings and had been seen near the island area on previous occasions. Chen and Agent Wells visited Thompson's cabin on Monday afternoon, and they found him cooperative but evasive when asked about his whereabouts on Saturday morning. "I was out fishing early, maybe around 6 or 7, but I came back before 10, Thompson claimed. "I didn't see any kid on that island, and I don't know anything about what happened. Thompson's cabin was small and cluttered with fishing equipment, and investigators noticed he seemed nervous and avoided making direct eye contact during questioning. When asked if they could search his property and boat, Thompson hesitated before agreeing, saying he had nothing to hide but seeming uncomfortable with the request. The search of Thompson's cabin revealed nothing obviously connected to Tyler, but investigators noticed several children's items, including a Minnesota Vikings t-shirt, similar to what Tyler had been wearing. Thompson explained that the shirt had belonged to his grandson who visited occasionally, and that he kept toys and clothes for when the boy came to stay, and this explanation seemed plausible on the surface. But when investigators contacted Thompson's daughter, she revealed that her son, Thompson's grandson, had never actually stayed at the cabin, and that Thompson had no relationship with the child. This discrepancy raised immediate red flags, and Thompson was brought to the sheriff's office for further questioning about why he had children's clothing if no children visited his cabin. Under pressure, Thompson admitted that he sometimes bought children's items because he liked having them around, and that he missed having young people in his life after his divorce years earlier. These statements were concerning but not criminal, and without evidence directly connecting Thompson to Tyler's disappearance, investigators couldn't arrest him based solely on suspicious behavior and lies about his grandson. Thompson's boat was processed forensically, and technicians found fibers and hair samples that were sent for analysis to determine if any matched Tyler or his clothing. While waiting for lab results, Chen interviewed Thompson's neighbors and people who knew him from around Eagle Lake, asking about his behavior and whether he'd ever shown inappropriate interest in children. One former neighbor mentioned that Thompson had been asked to leave a community event several years earlier, after he'd been seen talking to children in ways that made parents uncomfortable, though no formal complaints had been filed. This history of concerning behavior around children, combined with the lies about his grandson and the unexplained children's clothing, made Thompson the primary suspect in Tyler's disappearance. But days of investigation and forensic analysis produced no physical evidence linking Thompson to Tyler, and the fiber and hair samples from his boat were too degraded or common to provide definitive matches. By late July, the investigation had stalled without enough evidence to charge Thompson or any other suspect, and the case remained classified as a suspected abduction with no body recovered. The Lawson family was devastated by the lack of progress, unable to understand how their son could have vanished in broad daylight from an island visible from their cabin with no witnesses. Christine appeared on local television pleading for information, and she specifically addressed whoever had taken Tyler, begging them to return her son or at least reveal where he was. "Tyler is a gentle, kind boy who loves soccer and swimming," Christine said through tears. "If someone has him, please let him come home. Please don't hurt him. He's just 9 years old." The case was featured on America's Most Wanted in August 1983, and the broadcast generated hundreds of tips. But investigation revealed each was either mistaken identity or unrelated to Tyler's disappearance. Thompson remained under surveillance by law enforcement, who hoped he might lead them to evidence or make a mistake that would provide grounds for arrest. But he maintained his routine and showed no suspicious behavior. By fall, the intensive daily investigation had been scaled back, and the case became one of dozens of unsolved child abduction cases from the 1980s, with Tyler's family left to wonder what had really happened that July morning. The years passed slowly for the Lawson family, with 1983 becoming 2000 and then 2010, and Tyler's room remained exactly as it had been, filled with soccer trophies and posters of Minnesota Vikings players. Daniel died in 2007 from cancer, and those who knew him believed the stress and grief of losing Tyler had contributed to his declining health over the years. Christine never remarried and devoted herself to missing children advocacy, working with organizations to improve safety protocols at lakes and recreational areas, channeling her pain into preventing similar tragedies. Megan grew up with fragmented memories of her brother, and she became a child psychologist as an adult, dedicating her career to helping children who'd experienced trauma. Gerald Thompson died in 2015 at age 86 in a nursing home, and he died without ever being charged in connection with Tyler's disappearance, though he'd remained a suspect throughout his life. Detective James Morrison had taken over the cold case in 2005, and he'd maintained surveillance and investigation of Thompson until the man's death, always believing he'd been involved but unable to prove it. In September 2023, developers purchased Thompson's former lakefront property to build new cabins, and during demolition of the old structure, construction workers made a disturbing discovery in the crawl space beneath the cabin. Wrapped in plastic and hidden behind the foundation was a small skeleton, and scattered nearby were remnants of a gray t-shirt with faded lettering that appeared to say, Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota State Police were called immediately, and Detective Sarah Chen from the Cold Case Unit arrived to investigate what appeared to be human remains that had been concealed for decades. The skeleton was carefully extracted and transported to the State Forensic Laboratory, and preliminary examination confirmed it was a child approximately 9 years old who'd been deceased for many years. DNA testing was immediately ordered, and the remains were compared against genetic samples that Christine Lawson had provided to databases decades earlier, when such technology became available. The DNA analysis took 6 weeks, and when results came back in November 2023, they showed a 99.97% probability that the remains were Tyler Lawson, missing since July 1983 from Eagle Lake. The confirmation sent shockwaves through the investigation and devastated Christine and Megan, who learned that Tyler had been dead for 40 years, hidden beneath Gerald Thompson's cabin just across the lake from where they'd been staying. Detective Chen's investigation revealed that the crawl space where Tyler's remains had been found was accessed through a concealed panel that had been carefully constructed to hide the entrance. Forensic examination of the remains showed no obvious signs of trauma that would indicate cause of death, though 40 years of decomposition made determining exact circumstances difficult. Chen theorized that Thompson had approached the island in his boat on July 9, 1983, had convinced Tyler to remove his life jacket and come with him, and had taken the boy back to his cabin. What had happened after that remained unclear, but the evidence suggested Tyler had died shortly after being taken, possibly from suffocation or other means that left no skeletal trauma. Thompson had concealed Tyler's body in the crawl space, and he'd lived in that cabin for another 32 years, knowing the child he'd taken was hidden beneath the floor. The Minnesota Vikings t-shirt fragments found with the remains were tested and matched fabric composition consistent with 1983 manufacturing, supporting the timeline of Tyler's disappearance. Thompson's daughter was contacted and informed about the discovery, and she was horrified to learn her father had likely been a child killer who'd hidden his crime for decades. "I knew my father was strange and had problems," she told investigators, "but I never imagined he was capable of something like this, and I'm devastated for the Lawson family." Christine was given the opportunity to provide victim impact statements to media, and she expressed relief at finally knowing what had happened to Tyler, though the knowledge brought little comfort after 40 years. "For 40 years I wondered if Tyler was alive somewhere, if someone had taken him and raised him," Christine said through tears. "And now I know he died in 1983, probably within hours of being taken, and that monster lived with what he'd done for 32 more years." Megan struggled with the revelation that Tyler had been so close all those years, hidden across the lake while their family had searched desperately, and Thompson had pretended to help with early search efforts. The case was officially closed in December 2023, with Thompson identified as Tyler's killer, though no trial would ever occur because he'd died 8 years before the discovery. Tyler Lawson was finally laid to rest in January 2024, 40 years after he disappeared from Eagle Lake, and over 300 people attended the funeral service to honor the 9-year-old who'd never had the chance to grow up. Christine spoke at the service about the 40 years of not knowing that had been a special kind of torture, and about the bittersweet relief of finally being able to bury her son and know the truth. "Tyler loved soccer and swimming and the Minnesota Vikings," Christine told the gathering, "and he loved that island on Eagle Lake, and I'm grateful he's finally coming home, even though this isn't the ending I prayed for all those years." Megan placed Tyler's favorite soccer ball in the casket alongside other mementos from his childhood, and she read a letter she'd written to the brother she barely remembered, but whose absence had defined her entire life. The case brought renewed attention to how predators can exploit brief moments of vulnerability, even in places that seem safe, and how children can be taken in minutes from locations where parents believe they're supervised. Minnesota passed legislation in 2024 requiring enhanced safety protocols at public lakes and recreational areas, including mandatory reporting systems for missing children and better coordination between local and state law enforcement. Tyler's law also mandated that property sales involving structures built before 1990 include thorough inspections of crawl spaces and concealed areas, ensuring that hidden remains could be discovered during normal transactions. Christine established the Tyler Lawson Foundation to support families of long-term missing children, providing resources for DNA testing, age progression photos, and the emotional support needed to survive decades without answers. The foundation also funded training for law enforcement on recognizing when apparent accidents might actually be abductions, emphasizing that assumptions can derail investigations if made too quickly. Everyone thought Tyler drowned, Christine explained, and if not for Detective Chen in 1983 questioning that assumption, the investigation might have stopped at the lake and never looked at Thompson or other possibilities. The yellow life jacket that had been found discarded on the island was returned to Christine after being held as evidence for 40 years, and she donated it to a missing persons museum as a reminder of Tyler's case. Eagle Lake installed a memorial on the small island where Tyler had last been seen, with a plaque reading, Tyler Lawson, 1974-1983, taken too soon, found after 40 years. May his memory keep other children safe. The island became a place of reflection for families who visited Eagle Lake, and many would stop there to pay respects and to remind themselves about the importance of constant vigilance with children. Gerald Thompson's property was purchased by the state and converted to a public park, and officials decided the land should serve the community rather than profit developers given its dark history. The cabin where Thompson had lived and where Tyler's remains had been hidden was demolished completely, and a children's playground was built on the site, transforming a place of tragedy into somewhere children could play safely. Christine attended the playground's dedication in summer 2024, and while the irony of children playing where Tyler had died was painful, she found some comfort in the transformation. Tyler loved to play, Christine said at the dedication, and I think he would have liked knowing that other children get to be happy and safe in this place, even though he never got that chance. The case proved that some disappearances thought to be accidents are actually crimes, and that initial assumptions can persist for decades unless investigators remain skeptical and thorough. It demonstrated that predators can hide evidence successfully for their entire lifetimes, dying without facing justice, but leaving truth to be discovered by chance years later. And it showed that families deserve answers no matter how long it takes, and that finding remains after 40 years still provides closure, even when it comes too late for reunion. Christine lived to see Tyler found and buried properly, and she told reporters that while she'd never gotten the miracle of finding him alive, she'd gotten the next best thing, knowledge. For 40 years, my mind created endless scenarios about what happened to Tyler, Christine explained, and the not knowing was agony. But now I know he didn't suffer for years. He didn't grow up wondering why we abandoned him, and that monster didn't get away with it even though he died before being caught. The story of Tyler Lawson stands as a reminder that 9-year-olds should be safe on small islands visible from their parents, that life jackets found discarded suggest something more sinister than drowning, and that truth can hide for decades beneath floorboards. It reminds us that assumptions about accidents can blind investigators to darker possibilities, and that persistence and skepticism are crucial when evidence doesn't align with initial theories. And at Eagle Lake, where a boy in a Vikings t-shirt once explored an island before being taken by a monster across the water, his memory lives on as proof that justice delayed is not justice denied if truth eventually emerges. Megan continues her psychological work and her involvement with the Tyler Lawson Foundation, dedicating herself to helping other families navigate the trauma of having missing children. She told a documentary filmmaker in 2024 that learning Tyler had been found brought complicated emotions, because it meant giving up the last thread of hope that he might somehow still be alive. Part of me always wondered if Tyler was out there somewhere living a different life, Megan said, and as long as he was missing, that possibility existed. But finding him meant accepting he died at 9, and that's a grief that never fully heals. The case reminds law enforcement that when children disappear from water recreation areas, drowning should not be the automatic conclusion, and that physical evidence must be thoroughly examined before assumptions are made. Detective Chen, who questioned the drowning theory in 1983 and kept the investigation focused on abduction possibilities, was credited with ensuring Tyler's case was eventually solved when Thompson's cabin was demolished. If we'd accepted the accident theory and stopped investigating, Chen said, Tyler might never have been found, and Thompson would have succeeded in hiding his crime forever. So questioning assumptions saved this case. And in Minnesota, where lakes draw families seeking summer recreation and children should be safe exploring islands near their parents. Tyler's story endures as a tragic reminder that predators watch and wait for brief moments to destroy lives.